Summarize everything we've gone through for the last, I think this is 10 lessons, so that we've gone through for the last 10 lessons, and hopefully just put everything together. My hope is that by doing that, you'll see how all the various pieces work together to give you just a comprehensive understanding of the whole Trinity. And I do have at the end of the lesson some questions that hopefully you'll be able to answer by the time we're done. So don't think of it as a quiz or anything, but just as some questions to see if hopefully it'll give you an idea of how much you've learned and maybe give you more confidence in talking about the Trinity with other people. So throughout this series, I've been using as my primary analogy for the Trinity human nature. And people are always trying to find helpful analogies for the Trinity that inevitably always fall short for understandable reasons. The Trinity is, well, the divine nature is just so unique, fundamentally unique from anything in creation, that any analogy is going to fall short drastically. But I've been using human nature as the analogy, is the kind of the governing analogy, and I think that it is a good analogy because I think it shows us, by looking at how the nature of God is like the nature of man, and then looking at how the nature of God is radically different from the nature of man, I think it gives us just a framework in which to approach the questions about the Trinity. So we're just going to be reviewing, kind of following that same template. And so, for example, in review, I think it was in the very first lesson, I put forward the statement that the nature of God immutably subsists in three persons. That's the first proposition we would affirm as Trinitarians. So the nature of God immutably subsists in three persons. And so in contrast, human nature, or I'm just going to call it the nature of man, the nature of man mutably, and again, mutable just means unchangeable, mutable, changeable. The nature of man mutably subsists in an indefinite number of persons. And remember, the meaning of subsist just means to exist in. So the nature of man exists in an indefinite number of human persons. And the reason we say indefinite is because there is no logical or metaphysical limit to how many human beings or human persons there could be. There's, I think, about 8 billion people on Earth right now. In 10 years, it could be double that. Who knows? There is no logical limit to how many human beings. There might be a spatial limit to how many human beings can be on the Earth, but there's no logical limit or metaphysical limit to how many human beings could ever exist. Which means that God could, in principle, just keep on creating more and more human persons, and every human person would be unique from any other human person, and there would be this indefinite potential for more human persons. And because there's this indefinite potential for more human persons, the nature of man is never fully exhausted or realized. When we talk about the Trinity, on the other hand, we have only 3 possible persons. No more, no less. And it's not indefinite, because it's not that there could be 4 persons or 5 persons, but what we're saying is that there are only 3 possible divine persons: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so the number is definite, not indefinite. And when we say that the divine nature immutably subsists in these 3 persons, we're saying that there's no possible state of affairs where the divine nature wouldn't subsist in these persons. This is just the way it eternally subsists in 3 persons, and there's no possible scenario in which it could have been otherwise. And so, unlike the nature of man, the nature of God is fully realized. There is no unrealized potential in the divine nature, as there is with human nature. Which is good, because if you recall, we've defined the divine nature as pure actuality. So I'm just going to put up here pure actuality for the definition of the divine nature. And if you recall, pure actuality just means no unrealized potential in the divine being. God is all that He is. All that God can be, He is. There's no unrealized potential in Him. And so God is fully powerful, fully knowing, all-wise. If God were ignorant of something, then He would have a potential to become wiser or more knowledgeable, which would be contrary to immutability. If God is truly immutable, then He has to be all-wise and all-knowing. And if God is truly immutable, then He has to be all-powerful. And so all of God's attributes are summed up or captured by His immutability, or the immutability of the divine nature. So that's the beginning. We see the similarity here is that there is only one divine nature, and there's only one human nature. That's the similarity. And after that, that's where we begin to see all the differences. Because while there's only one human nature, there is an indefinite potential of human persons that could exist. But with God, there are only 3 persons that could exist. And so that's the first difference. And we'll just keep going through and be observing more and more differences. And if you were to ask, well, why is the number of human persons indefinite while the number of divine persons is definite? What's the cause for the difference? The answer is ultimately found in the immutability of the divine nature. Or maybe we'll start with the mutability of human nature, first of all. I would suggest to you that the reason there's an indefinite potential for more human beings is because of how mutable human nature is. So if you think of it like a lump of clay being mutable, there's so many different ways to form, that a potter can just form so many different things out of a lump of clay, so that every single thing he forms is going to be unique from any other piece of pottery that he forms from that lump of clay. And so it would be maybe similar to human nature, that human nature is so mutable that God can just keep forming new persons from that lump of clay, and each person would be unique from any other person that God forms. And so the indefiniteness of human persons is actually a consequence of our mutable nature. Does that make sense? That the reason there's an indefinite potential for more human beings has to do with the mutability of human nature?
Would it be correct to paraphrase it and say that what we have in unrealized potential in our finiteness is where that indefiniteness, or I guess that evidence is the indefiniteness, that the other potential would have to be realized in other persons?
I think so. If I'm understanding you, yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So, how those potentials, because it's like, to maybe to give an example, human nature, we all have the potential to know truth, but some people know more truth than other people, and so the way that potential is realized in one person might not be exactly the same as how it's realized in another person. And so all of us in here, we all realize human potentiality in our own unique ways. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Whereas with the divine persons, because we're talking about pure actuality where there are no unrealized potential,